Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. We've been doing barn burning by Faulkner, and before we continue with this story, let me recap quickly what we did in the last lecture. We started this story in the last lecture, and amongst all the things that I told you about Faulkner, one of the things was that Faulkner writes about the south of the United States, and his particular interest is in a description of the deterioration of Southern values as seen in certain families. Faulkner is a very famous novelist, and this is one of those short stories in which what he wrote in his novels is supplemented, and not just supplemented but supported also. He has as his main theme, he has the south of the US, and within that broader category, he writes about Southern values, the deterioration of Southern families who owned huge tracts of land, and slowly over the passage of years they lost some of the land and fell to hard times. This particular story that we started in the last lesson is titled Barn Burning, and as the title states, for agriculturists, the barn is a very important place. It's where you store hay for the animals, for the cattle, and it's also a place which needs to be kept dry. You know, in the agrarian economy, or in agricultural families, the farm animals at times become more important than the farmers or the people who work on the land. Because the farm animals are the responsibility of the farmers and whoever is taking care of the farm or the fields or the crops or the land. So they have to be very careful that these animals are put in a dry place, and the barn is always the driest possible place. It is a huge room where you store hay for the animals, and where you keep animals in the night to make sure that they don't get cold, that they are dry and comfortable. You have to take care of the comfort of the animals more than the comfort of the human beings. When this story starts off, Faulkner sort of puts us in the middle of the action and then gives us the background, and the action starts from a store in which court is being held. Faulkner is writing about times when you didn't have proper courthouses in all the villages and the small towns. So what was done was that a roster was made up, or a timetable was drawn up, according to which the justice of the peace or the judge would go to these individual villages and small town, let's say once a month or once every 2 months, and at that time would decide all the cases where legal procedures had to be adopted, and where the judiciary had to give decisions. So Faulkner's story opens at a point in time when the justice of the peace is listening to the stories of a landlord's complaint of his barn being burned down by his tenant. And although the judge cannot convict the farmer or the tenant, he says that you will still have to leave this place. By that time, the situation has become so tense in that place that the farmer, who is in the position of a sharecropper, and I'll explain the concept of the sharecropper in a minute, the farmer who is in the position of a sharecropper has already packed up his things and is in the process of leaving the town for another town. Now, coming back to sharecroppers, which I said I'll explain, the concept of the sharecropper was such that for a certain period of time, one portion of the land would be farmed, and that is, seeds would be sown, and the farmer would stay until harvesting time. He would do all the work. The land would belong to another individual, that is the landowner or the landlord, and the farmer, as sharecropper, would for his hard work, for his effort, be allowed to live on the land. He would be provided housing for himself and his family, and he would work on the land until the time when harvesting season came around. He would harvest the crop, and out of that crop he would get a certain amount. So his payment was not in cash, but it was in the form of kind. It was in the form of that crop, and the share that he got of that crop he could sell, he could use for himself, he could do whatever he wanted to. So sharecroppers were basically poor people, and the sharecropper around whom this story revolves is not just poor, but also has a very aggressive temperament. He's not the kind of person who will be meek and mild and work throughout the year and then be very humble. He's not at all humble. The story, as I said, revolves around the character of this sharecropper and his son. And it is the son who is telling us most of the story. So we had ended at the point where the Justice of the Peace orders the sharecropper out of the town. The sharecropper says, I'm leaving in any case, because outside the store where the court is convening, he already has that wagon drawn by a horse, all loaded up with his stuff and with his family. His family comprises of his wife's sister, 2 sons and 2 daughters. They travel 2 days, 2 nights, and finally they come to the place where they will be staying. So tomorrow they were there. In the early afternoon, the wagon stopped before a paintless 2-room house, identical almost with the dozen others it had stopped before, even in the boy's 10 years. And again, as on the other dozen occasions, his mother and aunt got down, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so 10 years is the age of the boy. And in these 10 years, Faulkner tells us that this family has moved 12 times. So they do not stick to one place. They work for a whole season, and when the harvest comes around, they move to another farm where they will do sharecropping. So the two sisters sat in the wagon, and as soon as the wagon stopped, because this is something that they have been doing as a habit, it's not new, they've been doing it for 10 years, and the routine is such that it doesn't have to be explained to them what they have to do next. So as soon as the wagon stops, and before the farmer or his children disembark, his wife and the wife's sister, they get down and they start doing what they normally do. Now, what you need to see here is that there are three categories of people here. There are 6 members of this family, sorry, 7, and all of them have designated jobs or work that is fixed out for you. The wife and the sister do not hesitate, they start working at once, but the daughters of the farmer have rather inflated ideas of what they should do and who they are. So when they get off at this house where they're going to live for the next few months, one of the sisters says, likely it ain't fitting for hogs. So her opinion is that this place is not fit for pigs. And the father says, fit it will, and you'll hog it and like it. You know, this is what you have. You don't have any choice in the matter. Get out of them chairs and help your ma unload. So the daughters are not very willing workers. The mother and the aunt, they get off at once and they start doing the work, but the daughters sit until the father tells them that you don't have a choice. This is where we are going to stay and you will do your work. So the two sisters get down, big bovine in a flutter of cheap ribbons. So, you know, they're farmers' daughters, but they like cheap finery. And so they have ribbons in their hair, although they know that they're going to be working with their hands all the time. They are big. Faulkner compares them to pigs. And he says that they are big and they are bovine. They say that this place is not fit for a pig, but their sizes and their bodies are also like those of pigs. So they get down once they realize that the father is not going to sort of give them a lot of attention. And they also start doing what they have been trained to do. One of them takes out a worn broom. The other takes out a battered lantern, because the rooms are going to be dark, and we're not talking about times where electricity is commonly supplied in these far-flung villages and towns. So the father hands the reins to the eldest son and begins to climb down over the wheel. And he says, when they get unloaded, take the team to the barn and feed them. So he gives instructions to his son, he gives instructions to his daughters. His wife and her sister do not need any instruction. And then he says, come with me. And the little boy is not really ready, because he's just 10 years old, but the father says, Dad, I have to go and meet the person whom I will be working for. Now the farmer's name is Abner, but the only person who uses his name is his wife. You don't see the sister speaking. The only person who does speak in this story is either Abner's wife, or Abner himself, or this little boy. The sisters don't have much of a role. They're just there for, let's say, ornament and to provide the proper background to the story. And the wife's sister doesn't say anything. Even the elder son hardly speaks. So the action concentrates around Abner, his wife, and his younger son. So whenever Faulkner describes Abner, he paints a very harsh picture of him. He doesn't present him as a likable person or as a pleasant individual. The first description that we have in this part of the story states that the farmer, or Abner, had a harsh level stare beneath the shaggy, graying, irascible brows. So not a very pleasant experience, not one which would make you think, oh, what a handsome man he is. And he has a very sort of hard nature. When his wife tries to call out to him, he says, I'm going to have a word with the man who is going to own me for the next 8 months. So 8 months is the time it takes for a crop to be harvested. So he takes his younger son, gives instructions to the older son, and goes up the road. And the younger son, he's just 10 years old, but because of the experience that he has had lately in the other town, in the courthouse, he doesn't even question the father. He had tried to go contrary to his father's decisions, but he found out that it didn't pay, and the father told him that you have to stick with your family. You cannot take the side of strangers, because if you do that, soon you will have no family left. So he takes this younger son and he walks up to the house of the landlord. And Faulkner says that because the little boy had been slapped for trying to speak the truth, now when Abner tells the boy to come along, he doesn't say anything at all. Anything at all. So they walk up to this house, and presently they can see the grove of oaks and cedars and other flowering trees and shrubs where the house would be. They couldn't see the house yet, but soon they, when they walk beside a fence, and they go through a gate which is swinging open between two brick pillars, the boy sees the house. And when he sees the house for the first time, he forgets what he has been through, because the house is so huge and beautiful that he cannot concentrate or on anything. And the reason why he is sort of struck dumb by this house is because throughout his 10 years, they had traveled in rather poor country. And this was country where you had small farms and small fields and houses. But this house is palatial, you know, it's a huge house. And he had never seen a house like this before. And he thinks that this house is as big as a courthouse. You know, that's his idea of a huge place. And the thoughts that go on in the mind of the child are presented by Faulkner in a way that makes you feel that these are the thoughts of a 10-year-old, and not those of an adult. So he starts to think of what kind of people live in this house, because he's never seen such a huge house before. It's not just huge, but there is a peace and dignity about this house that makes even the barns and the cribs look peaceful. So the house has an aura of peace and calm, and of course immense wealth. So they walk up to the house, and that's where this little child, this 10-year-old, starts to notice his father's physical disability or deformity, whatever you can call it. He walks with a limp, and Faulkner says that because of this limp he had never looked big, but now when he stands before this house, he is dwarfed by the house, because the house is so huge that you know, the little boy forgets everything. And when his father starts walking up to the house, there's a lot of awe in the little boy's mind as to whether they should walk up to such a beautiful and palatial house or not. So this part of the story has Faulkner giving a lot of detailed description, and this detailed description does not stop at the house. He also gives minute description of Abner, the sharecropper, and how he walks up those steps and up to the house. And now the little boy's thoughts are that Abner would be impressed with this house. Abner, of course, is not. To him, a house is a house, and he doesn't think that it's such a wonderful place for the simple reason that it's not his own. This is the house that belongs to the owners. And so he's not impressed, and he doesn't pay much attention to the size of the house or the kind of place that it is. But the child feels that perhaps now that they have come to live so close to such a palatial house, maybe whatever goes on in this house will change his father and ultimately make an improvement in his temperament and his nature. So they cross the portico, and he can hear his father's stiff foot coming down. And the little boy feels that, you know, there's a lot of power and authority in the way that his father walks. The way that he's dressed is very formal. That's the same dress that he had worn the day of the trial when he had to appear before the justice of the peace. And according to the little boy's perspective, the farmer is not impressed by the house. And when he knocks at the main door at once flies open, and what he does see is a black man with very neatly cut hair in a linen jacket, who stands in such a manner that they cannot enter the house. And because he's a Negro, he's an African American or a black American, he is shown in a servile position. He is shown in the position of a servant. And so he is not just a servant, but he is a servant with some authority. Now when he sees this black man barring his way, trying to stop him from entering the house, the sharecropper gets very angry. So what he does is he lifts his foot, he places it on the door jamb, he places it on the door, flings the door back, and with the door the black servant also, because the black servant has told him to wipe his feet. Now you see, his job is to take care of the house. So when he sees this man standing here with dirty shoes, he says, wipe your feet before you enter the house. In any case, the major isn't home. The owner, the landlord, is not home. So when the sharecropper hears the black man saying this, he gets angry. Remember, the tension in the South, even in the 20th century, was such that the white people thought themselves superior, and to have a black man telling a white man to wipe his feet was an insult that Abner could not take. So with one motion, he throws aside the door as well as the black servant, and he enters. Now when he enters, there is this rug in the entrance on which he places his feet, and because he has walked up and because he's been traveling and it's dusty, the moment he puts his foot on the rug, it leaves a huge dirty imprint. The Negro or the black servant, of course, goes screaming and he says, Miss Lula, Miss Lula, because he can't do anything, you know, physically. He is overpowered by Abner. And then the manner in which Abner has entered by flinging him and the door open gives him the idea that he cannot fight physically with this man. So he goes screaming to his mistress. And when he calls out to his mistress, the mistress, Miss Lula, she comes swiftly, and when she comes into his presence, the little boy realizes that she is a lady, and that his father, in coming inside the house, is violating all principles of hospitality. Faulkner describes the appearance of Miss Lula, and he says that, you know, she had on a beautiful dress, and she had an apron that she had tied because she was working in the kitchen. And when she enters, she's wiping her hands on a towel, and she doesn't look at his father at all. What she does look at is the place where the father is standing. Now there's a beautiful golden rug in the entrance of the house, and that's where he's standing. That's where he's making the most damage. She doesn't even bother to look at his face. What she does look at is the blonde rug, the golden rug that has been spoiled. And when the black servant looks or sees Miss Lula looking at the rug, he tries to defend his own self, and he says, you know, I tried, I told him to. And Miss Lula, because she is a southern lady, and she is not at all violent, or she's not at all loud, she says, will you please go away? Major D. Spain is not at home. Will you please go away? So she is very polite, she is very soft-spoken, although she realizes that this man has messed up her rug. She still is very, very polite. In a very mild manner, she tells him to go back. His father had not spoken again. He did not speak again. He did not even look at her. He just stood stiff in the center of the rug in his hat. Now this is the supreme rudeness, not to take off your hat. And this is something that is very cultural. It was particularly so in the South. Men in the presence of women did not wear their hats, and out of respect they had to take off their hats, bow to the woman, and then only could they place the hat on the head again. Now all of this Abner has violated. So when Miss Lula comes in, he's still standing there with his hat on, and he doesn't even look at her. Now there's a lot of tension that builds up in this story, because neither of these are looking at each other. The woman, that is the landlady or the landowner's wife, looks at where his feet have dirtied the rug or the carpet, and Abner just looks at the house. He looks around the room as if he's trying to memorize what it looks like. And then he turns. Now mind you, he's not spoken, he's not said a single word. He just stands there. He's not spoken to the black servant, he's not spoken to Miss Lula. He just stands there in the doorway on the blonde rug, and when Miss Lula says Major Despain is not at home, please go away, he turns around on his good foot. Remember, he has a limp. He turns around on his good foot and he leaves. Now all this time he has never once looked at the damage that he's done to the rug. He flings the door open, he throws the Negro aside, he walks in, he stands there, and then when she says please go away, he turns round and leaves. And of course the door closes behind them upon the hysteric and indistinguishable woman wail. So the woman starts wailing because her rug is totally destroyed. So when the door closes behind them, they can hear the woman wail because, you know, her house has been dirty, her rug has been destroyed. It's such a beautiful golden rug, and on that you have this huge imprint of the farmer's foot. So when Abner turns around and stands at the top of the stairs, he scrapes his boot clean on the edge of the stairs. Now you might ask why he didn't do that when he was going into the house. The thing is, he did not think that there was anything that could stop him. He goes with confidence because he is, after all, a white man, and he is not afraid of anyone. So he behaves badly, he behaves very rudely inside the house, not just to the black servant, but also to the mistress of the house, to Miss Lula. And so when he returns from Miss Lula's house, he stands at the top of the stairs and he cleans his boot there. And one of the few times that he actually speaks is at this point where he stands in front of the house and he looks at it and he says, "Pretty and white, ain't it?" That's sweat. That's Negro sweat. So black people have made this house. And then he goes on to add something else, and he says, maybe it ain't white enough yet to suit him. And of course he's talking about the owner, Major D. Spain. And he says maybe he wants to mix some white sweat with it. And he's referring to himself, because the work that these sharecroppers did was also the kind of work that the slaves on the plantations were doing. And it was just that these white people, they were not considered good enough to mix with the landed people. And one of the phrases that was used to describe them was poor white trash. That they were white, but they were poor and they were trash. They were to be looked down upon because they didn't have land, and without land in the South, you had no status, you had absolutely no position. If you owned land, you were somebody. But if you did not own land, then you were a nobody, then you were poor white trash. So standing there outside Major D. Spain's house, he makes this declaration, and he says that Major D. Spain wants white sweat, also wants white people to work for him, and not just the black people. So of course they come back, and the little boy starts chopping wood. Now he may be very small, but he knows that he has to contribute to the household chores. So he has this small axe with which he chops wood, and he realizes that his mother, his aunt, and the two sisters were working inside the house, trying to prepare a meal on the stove that they carried from farm to farm. Now, when he was chopping the wood, he heard hooves. He heard the sound of a horse approaching, and very soon he saw a man in a linen suit riding a fine sorrel mare, and carrying on the mare the rolled rug in front of the Negro youth, following on a fat bay carriage horse. So the owner of the house or the farm, Major D. Spain, comes galloping up, followed by the black servant, who is of course carrying the rug. Major D. Spain is not going to carry the rug around. He leaves such work to his employees. So these two horses come thundering up, and the Major's face is red. He's angry because this sharecropper has dared not only to enter his house but also to spoil his rug. So they come thundering up to where his father and brother are sitting, and the next thing that the little boy sees is that they enter the yard, and they immediately leave again. Now the little boy hears the father calling the sisters' names out, and he gives them certain instructions which they follow, and which means that you wash this rug and the footprints that Abner had made when he went up to the house. Okay. So when the father calls out one of his daughters' names, remember, these are the daughters who are fat and who really don't want to do any work at all. So when he calls out to one of them, she comes out and she starts to drag the rug inside. Now the rug is rolled. The ground is, of course, of dirt. You can see their laziness and their lethargy. They do not have sense enough to know that you don't drag such a rug. So when the father says that if you can't pick up the rug, you go and set up the wash pot. The sister, who is very, very lazy, she calls out to the little boy who's 10 years old, and she passes on this order to him, and she says, you go and set up the wash pot. Now all that she's doing is, one of them is dragging the rug, the other, instead of picking up the other end, is just walking behind the rug. Now that makes the father angry, and when she calls out to the little boy to go and set up the wash pot, he says, pick it up and carry the rug. So then she has no choice, and she just sort of picks up the rug from one end, and they carry it inside. Now when they do this, they've already found out what the father did inside the house of Major D. Spain. So the first one, because these two sisters, they would rather sit idle the whole day. So one of them says, if I were going to spend enough money to get a rug from France, I wouldn't put it in a place where anyone who enters the house would step on it and make it dirty. But even this conversation shows that they are not willing to do any work. They want any excuse not to have to do the work. So now the mother knows that her daughters are good for nothing. So she calls out to her husband and she says, Abner, let me do it. But Abner wants to sort of maybe train his daughters, maybe he wants to teach his daughters a lesson. He says, no, you go and you get dinner ready. The girls will do this. So when he is standing on their heads, then the girls do the work. So they spread it flat in the dust beside the wash pot. That's like a huge, what you'd call deegcha, or a deeg, in which water is boiling, and they just place the rug on the dust. Now the complaint that Major Spain had was that Abner had dirtied the rug. Putting the rug again on the dust or on the dirt of the yard is a sure sign that you're going to make it dirty again, or you're going to make it dirtier still. So the two sisters, they stoop over it, and while the father stood over their heads, he knew that his daughters were somehow going to get out of it. So he stands on their head while they're washing it. And in his presence, they dare not say anything. In his presence, they do everything quietly, without complaint, and he doesn't even have to raise his voice. So that's how they wash the rug. So when this little boy, who is still chopping wood, he sees his father, he at once goes and joins his father. And what his father does has his full support now. Remember, in the very beginning of the story, he had tried to do something that his father did not like, and his father had slapped him. Now that slap is enough to teach him the lesson that he is not to question whatever the father is doing. So when he sees his father, he automatically does whatever his father wants. He doesn't wait like his sisters to be told what to do. He's very, very impressed by his father. He walks in the shadow of his father, and he's made up his mind that he's not going to do anything that his father would not like. Okay, so the rug is washed, and then they hang it on the back of two chairs beside the beside the fire, of course, not the father, so that it can dry out. And when the little boy goes and sees the rug, he sees that the place where his father's foot had made a mark, that mark had been removed, but the rug now looked as if, you know, a sort of mowing machine had gone over it, because, you know, they wash the rug, and the rug is not the kind that can safely be washed as you would wash ordinary clothes. So when the little boy is done chopping the wood and he comes and he sees this rug which is left out now to dry, he thinks even at that age that this rug does not look as it looked when they entered the hall, when they first saw the rug. It was a beautiful rug, and of course his father had made it dirty. They had the two sisters, lazy as they were, they had washed it, but they had not washed it out so completely that when dry it would look like new. So what they do is that they hang it on the back of two chairs near a fire so that it can dry out. And the little boy, because he's sort of describing everything to us, or he's narrating the story, he stops his work because it's dark now, and he goes inside to have his meal. And here Faulkner tells us a little more about their situation and how poor they are, because he says that they were going to eat the cold remains of the meal that had been prepared in the afternoon. And the only positive thing that he feels he gets is the coffee, because there's still a fire so they can make coffee. Otherwise, if they did not want to dry that rug, there would have been no fire and therefore no coffee. When he looks at the rug, he sees that the tracks of his father's foot are gone, but of course the marks of, as he calls it, a lily passion mowing machine, those are still there. So they let the rug hang there, eat their food, and then go to bed. And the little boy, because he's been working very hard, chopping wood the whole day, he goes to sleep at once. And the next thing that he knows is that his father's foot is prodding him awake. You know, his father doesn't even use his hands to wake the little boy up. He just prods with his foot, and the little boy gets up. Once he's up, he has to start work. So the The father says, catch up the mule. He goes outside, he catches the mule, he saddles him up, and when he returns with the mule, his father is standing in the doorway with the rolled rug over his shoulder. Now remember, it's a rug that's very heavy. Those two sisters had to carry the rug, and even then it was heavy for them. But Abner is strong, and so he rolls up the rug and he puts it on his shoulder. And when the little boy asks his father, aren't you going to ride? The father says, no, you are going to ride. So he says, give me your foot. And he bends his knee into his father's foot, climbs onto the mule, and once he is seated on the mule, the father swings the rug up in front of his son. So in that manner, they're going to carry the rug back to Major D. Spain. The boy expects the father will ride and that he will carry the rug back. But this is the time when his father has him ride the mule and puts the rug in front of him so that they can return it to Major D. Spain. And it is not yet dawn before the father starts traveling towards Major D. Spain's house. And once he gets there, he unloads the mule, he takes the rug off, and without getting his son's help, and this is again an instance of how strong physically the father is, without getting any help from the little boy, he picks up the rug, he puts it over his shoulder, and again the little boy sees his father with that same stiff foot limping up the stairs and going up to the door. And once he gets to the door, you know, he just flings the rug down, and to the little boy's ears, it's not daylight yet, there are no sounds coming. He says that the sound was unbelievably loud and thunderous. So he just throws the rug there and he returns. Now the boy, mind you, all that time has been sitting on the mule. The father comes back, he doesn't knock at the door, he doesn't bother to tell anyone that he's putting the rug there. He just comes back, and that's when the little boy sees a light going up inside the house. Obviously that sound of the rug falling on the floor against the wall or against the door is so loud that people inside the house wake up at once. And the little boy, you know, because he feels scared of his father now, and of course he is very, very impressed by his father, he asks his father again, don't you want to ride now? And the father says, now we can both ride, because the rug is off. So he climbs up beside him, and the little boy thinks, you know, now Major D. Spain will come out of the door when he hears this loud noise, and what he's going to do is what scares the little boy. But he in the presence of his father, he feels confident because his father is big and strong, and although he would like to ride the mule hard, his father jerks at the reins so that they go very slowly back home. in the first red rays of the sun, they were in the lot. So when the sun is just sort of dawning, they return to the home, and they start to prepare the mules for the plow gear. Now you see, the mules are used not just for riding, but they are also used to plow the land. The other farm animals also were used in the same way. You have cattle, which is kept on the farm because it gives milk, and of milk you make cream and butter, and then you can sell or you can use yourself. But he says that as they as they returned, they heard the same sorrel mare coming again. This time the rider is collarless. Major Despain is really, really angry, and the voice that with which he speaks is shaking because he's so angry. You know, it's like he cannot control his emotions. He can't control his feelings. But the only effect that it has on his father is that he continues to buckle his mare up, and he does not bother to even acknowledge the presence of Major Despain, so that Major Despain virtually is speaking to Abner's back. And what he says is, you must realize you have ruined that rug. Wasn't there anybody here, any of your women? And then, you know, he's so angry, he can't even speak further. He just stops because he sees that Abner is not listening to him. He sees his elder son, Abner's elder son, leaning against the stable door, and he is speechless because he realizes that he is outnumbered. And he says, it cost $100, but you never had $100, you never will. So I'm going to charge you 20 bushels of corn against your crop. I'll add it in your contract, and when you come to the commissary, you can sign it. That won't keep Mrs. Despain quiet, but maybe it will teach you to wipe your feet off before you enter her house again. So he is very angry, and he says, do you realize what you've done? You have ruined this rug. Even in washing, you have ruined it. You've spoilt it forever. And this rug was a very expensive rug. It cost $100. But you don't have $100. So now this gives you an idea of how poor the sharecroppers were. Because when Major Despain says, you have never had $100, you never will. But I'm still going to fine you. And that fine is going to come out of what you get in our contract for sharecropping, and I'm going to add that, and I'm going to fine you 20 bushels of corn. Now that is a very heavy fine, because like I told you in the beginning of this lecture, sharecropping was done by people who had no money, and the only money that they got was when at the end of the harvest time they could sell a little of the corn or whatever it was that they were growing. So to have 20 bushels of corn levied as fine is very harsh punishment. But that is what Major Despain says he's going to fine Abner. Now we're going to stop here. I'm quickly going to recap what we have done. And hopefully we'll be able to complete this story in the next class. Okay, so going back to the beginning, we start at a point where the sharecropper Abner, his wife's sister, his two daughters, and his two sons are going to a new place because they have ended their stay in one village or at one farm, and now they're going to another farm where he is going to farm the land and ultimately to share the crop with the landowner. Of course, the sharecroppers got a very small portion, and most of the produce went to the landowner. Abner, the kind of temperament he has, as soon as they unload their stuff in this house, he takes his younger son, who is about 10 years old, and he goes up to the house of the landlord, and without waiting to be called in, he just flings the door open, he kicks it open, and he goes and stands inside the hall. Now, partly it's his temperament. Also, the reason could be that when the door is opened, there's a black man standing there, and he tells this white man to wipe his feet because he can see that his boots are dirty. Having this black servant telling him what to do is something that people like Abner just cannot tolerate. So he flings the door open and he goes and stands on this beautiful blonde rug that Mrs. D. Spain has put right in the entrance. Now, because his boots are dirty, when he goes and stands there, the rug becomes dirty, and this black servant, he starts shouting, "Miss Lula, Miss Lula." Now, the owner's wife, Mrs. D. Spain, she comes from the kitchen where she's been doing some baking, and she's wearing a beautiful gown, and on top of that gown she's wearing an apron. And when she sees this man standing there, she doesn't look at him. All that she does is look at the rug where Abner has left a very dirty footprint. And she says, "Please go away. Major D. Spain is not at home. Please go away." And she's very calm and very cool. But as soon as Abner turns around and leaves, the door closes behind him, and she starts screaming to high heavens. And Abner and his little son can hear her wails, because that is when the floodgates of her emotions sort of break open, and she realizes the harm that has been done to his rug. So soon after Abner and his son reach back home, Major D. Spain rides up with his black servant on another horse carrying the rug, and he throws the rug in Abner's yard and says, "This has to be washed." So Abner tells his daughters to set up the wash pot and to wash the rug. Simple, you know, you have to clean it. You put a dirty footprint on it, you have to wash it. So the girls wash the rug, but the girls, because they are lazy, good-for-nothing girls and do not do anything unless they are given specific instructions, they wash it very half-heartedly. And when the rug is washed, they put it on the back of 2 chairs before a fire so that it can dry out. Now, when the little boy, Abner's younger son, sees the rug, he realizes that it has not been cleaned properly. It has been washed, and the place where his father's footprints had showed, they don't show anymore. But because it's not the kind of rug that can be washed, easily. The whole rug is sort of slightly spoiled. It's got very long fiber, and you know, when you wash it, you have to dry it properly, otherwise you can see portions where it has been washed and portions which have not been washed. So it's like the whole rug is spoiled. And before dawn, Abner wakes up his younger son and says, okay, let's go return the rug. So he puts his son on the mule, puts the rug in front of his little son, and walks with him right up to Major Despain's house. And without any courtesy, without calling anyone, without knocking at the door, he just throws the rug down and returns home with his son. No sooner has he returned home that he hears the sound of the horse, the mare, and Major Despain comes up and he is very, very angry. But you see that Abner doesn't pay any attention to Major Despain. He keeps his back turned so that Major Despain has to speak to his back. And what he says is that it was a very expensive rug, that Mrs. Despain is very angry and she's screaming, and that he has spoiled the rug and not improved the condition even though he's washed it. He's angry because it's not been washed properly. So like I told you before, the daughters washed it just half-heartedly. You know, they didn't do it really seriously. They didn't really do it with the intention of cleaning it. They just wanted to have it washed, and that was it. So when Major Despain sees that Abner will not turn around to hear him speak, he talks to his back and he says, you know, this rug cost Mrs. Despain $100, but you are so poor, you're never going to have $100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fine you. And this fine is going to be in the form of 20 bushels of corn. Now this is very harsh fine, because if Abner gives him 20 bushels of corn, he's going to have nothing, absolutely nothing left for his own family. But that is what Major Despain says, and having delivered this judgment, he returns. Now we're going to put a stop here, but when we have the next class, inshallah, we'll continue from here and see what happens after Major Despain delivers this verdict that he's going to fine Abner 20 bushels of corn. So thank you for being patient with me, and Allah Hafiz.